Welcome to our October monthly program. Thank you for being here. In order to encourage HASP members to make class presentations, the Curriculum Committee will present a tutorial this Thursday at 9:30 in the HASP classroom. It is designed to help anyone who might have an interest in teaching a course. We will explain the course proposal process and provide support to those interested in preparing a class. Note that you are under no obligation to attend. Please advise Kim or Amy, though, if you can be there. We would really appreciate some participation from our membership in presenting classes. That was how this organization was founded, and we would be happy if more of you would step forward and make a presentation. At the Great Decisions class a week ago yesterday, there were moments during the discussion when the way political differences were expressed left some, if not many, uncomfortable. And many felt the presenter was not given the proper respect. The next day, Kim sent all of us a constant contact email reminding us to practice the virtues of public discourse. As a member of the Hope community, these virtues need to be observed when we participate in our monthly programs and classes. Let me remind, encourage, and thank you for the many ways in which you demonstrate these virtues in our interactions together. Carla Verschure, the membership chair, will now introduce our guests and new HASP members.
Good morning on this beautiful first day of October. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have nice weather all of the fall? And I'm so pleased to see so many of you here. And in addition to our members, we have 14 visitors and guests with us today. So if you're a visitor, would you just stand where you are so we can acknowledge you? We also have some new members I'd like to welcome, and it's interesting, I started out with a long list of new members today and found out that nearly half of them are traveling. So they're taking advantage of great weather, at least I hope it's great wherever they are, and we will welcome them next month. But for those that are here, we want to give you a special HASP welcome. So when I call your name, would you stand and just turn around so everybody can get a good look at you? Loretta Sue Krieger Baxter and David Krieger. Beverly Hawks, Ori Hawks, Lee Pavich, Marie Pedersen, Cheryl Roman, Jane Schuyler, and Marilyn Wickens. Please welcome our new members.
Thank you, Carla. Tom Weber with our monthly program committee will now introduce the speaker.
Good morning. Jeff Stout is Executive Director of Research, Technology, and New Mobility of North America for Yanfeng Automotive Interiors. In this role, he leads a 31-person advanced development team responsible for product and process innovation, new mobility development, and product management. He also helped establish Yanfeng's Automotive Interiors New Mobility X Innovation Center in Sunnyvale, California. That's tough duty. He was named to this role in 2017. Prior to this position, he was the Director of Product Management for 4 years. In July of 2015, Johnson Control and Yanfeng Automotive Trim Systems formed a joint venture for interior business of both companies called Yanfeng Automotive Interiors. At Johnson Control, he held a variety of leadership roles of increasing responsibility in engineering and innovation, including an expat assignment leading all new interior launches in China for Johnson Control's joint venture with FAW. Stout joined Johnson Controls in 1994 as a product engineer. He has earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Philosophy from Calvin College. Yeah, sorry about that. He also holds a Master of Science degree in Engineering Leadership. Jeff has been active in the leadership of his local church, and he also started an inner-city housing development initiative in Grand Rapids. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Stout.
Check, check. Good morning, everyone. The bio that just got read is the bio that I always send out when I have a chance to do presentations like this. As he was saying it, I realized, well, normally I'm speaking to people who are in the business, who care about a lot of automotive history stuff, which is maybe helpful for you guys to calibrate kind of who's speaking to you this morning. But maybe more interesting or relevant would be a bit of a personal side of, so how did I get to this point of standing on the stage? My mother immigrated from the Netherlands when she was 9 years old. Her father was killed by the Germans as they left the country on March 8, 1945. Her mom remarried, and a couple years later had issues, moved to Holland, lived here on Ben Ralty until she went to Calvin. Sorry about that. Yeah, I got one. You remember that earlier comment about being respectful? Just try. So she ends up meeting her husband at Calvin. They end up moving out to California. Then they moved to Byron Center. Or actually, they moved to New Era, if you guys know where New Era is, up north. My father was the principal of New Era Christian School for several years before moving to Byron Center. I grow up, go to South Christian, go to Calvin, get a couple degrees, get a job at Prince Corporation, and then all the stuff that got read becomes true. If you have questions afterwards about any of the stuff that was in there, about, well, what church do you go to, and what's that housing thing? I'm just as excited about that stuff as I am what I'm going to talk to you about. One other thing, I got married to my wife, who also went to Calvin, and we have 4 children, and we have a smattering of other people who live with us. We have a refugee from Eritrea who joined our family a year ago, a couple of foreign exchange students from China, and I say that as the segue into the presentation of right now you should be thinking, oh, I think that guy's a little crazy. Because I am a little bit crazy. The engineering philosophy, I'm fairly, what's helpful in the job, and maybe this morning, I'm fairly immune to people thinking that I'm nuts. So if at any time in my presentation you want to just be like, woo, you will not offend me. There are plenty of people who have thought that before you, and plenty more that will come after. But we're going to talk about mobility this morning for a few minutes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the industry, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that affects kind of the local team here relative to Yanfeng, which was Johnson Controls, which was Prince back in the day. And where that's moving forward and how that affects you and your kids, grandkids, society, and what that's ultimately going to look like. A couple of real quick slides. Not super readable. In the world of mobility, we talk about autonomous vehicles. And then we have to categorize that of what does that mean. If you guys drive a reasonably new car, it probably has a thing called adaptive cruise control. Back in the day, you hit cruise and you went 65 miles an hour. Didn't matter what the situation was. Now, if you're 65 and you're coming up on someone who's slower than you, it slows you down. That's a form of autonomous driving. The car is making a decision for you. You didn't tell it to slow down. It said, well, there's a car, I should slow down. That's level 3 autonomous. What this is kind of getting at is that there's level 4 autonomous, that the car can drive itself by itself, but you still have the opportunity to intervene. And then there's level 5, which is the last level that says, you got nothing. The car is going to take you where it takes you, and if you don't like it, There's nothing, there is no steering wheel, there is no gas pedal, there is no anything. It's going to take you where it's going to take you. I like to start out with this slide just because it's fun to talk about how fast things are changing. This was a one-page slide from Boston Consulting Group. It came out, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, and they talked about this one in the middle I like the best. It's a bad laser. Basically that we're going to have level 4, that the car would be able to drive itself, even though you could intervene if you needed to, by 2021. Oops, that happened last year. So they were off by 3 years a year ago. Oops. Those are smart guys at Boston Consulting Group. How did they get that so wrong? And it comes to this picture. I could give the entire presentation and just stay on this one slide. I won't, but I could. This is parade, 1900, New York City. Exact same location of the parade. Someone took a picture 13 years later. What's going on? 1900, you got one crazy guy who bought a car and thought it was kind of cool, driving down New York City street, people laughing at him. 13 years later, one horse, all cars. Well, what happened? What happened was people realized, hey, this is a better way to go. Now, an important clarification here that somebody pointed out to me, which is fantastic, is that in 1913, when there's only one horse, nationally, the level of car penetration was still only about 20%. So sitting here in 2019, we can look at a picture and chuckle and go, yeah, 1913, they should have known that's where things were going. But the people who lived in 1913 said, well, maybe that'll take off, but maybe not. I mean, in New York City, those people drive cars, but that's never going to come to Holland, Michigan. At some point, it does. What happens in the big city migrates. So we are on the front end of this exact same picture. Today, you all drove here in your car. Or you drove a car somewhere, and I saw a couple people get off a bus. But in general, it's personal mobility where you buy it, you own it, you take it out of your garage, and you drive somewhere. I don't know if it's 13 years. We'll argue about dates in a moment. But what's going to happen is you're not going to have a car. You're going to have access to mobility. You're going to say, I want to go to the HASP monthly speaker series. And a car will come and pick you up and take you, and the parking that you had a hard time with will not be a problem, because you will never park again. The car will drop you off and it'll go on its way. That is the transition that's happening. The really, really uncomfortable part for people like me and people who are in the business is the question of the people who made the buggies on the left. Are they the people that made the cars on the right? No. Universally, no. Which is a fascinating question for me as a student in the mobility space of, why the heck not? You've got a buggy, there's a horse out there, okay, let the horse go, eat some grass, replace it with an engine. You're good to go. They didn't. Well, why didn't they? The answer to that is pretty complicated, but the short answer is, what's good for their business today is actually crippling your ability to adapt to change in the future. So if you run your business perfectly, rationally, maximizing profits, maximizing capital utilization, all the things we measure in business, you will never make it to the right side. Because what you got to do to be on the right side is say, I'm going to throw away all of my current business in order to be prepared for tomorrow. So the question that this slide asks, without words, is will GM still be a company in our lifetimes? And I don't mean to pick on GM specifically. BMW, Daimler, VW, Honda, Nissan, Toyota, Subaru, name any car maker you want to name. If this happens again, which we all think it will in the industry, are they going to survive? Because they are on the left side of the picture. They are making cars and getting you to buy them. Tomorrow, the only thing that someone needs to do is make a car, and then someone else is going to provide that service, and the question is, who's going to provide that service? This is a little pie chart. It basically is describing the effectiveness of autonomous driving. So if you have a car and it's driving itself, how often as a person do I have to intervene because the car didn't get it right? That 3/4 of a pie chart is Waymo. Waymo is a division of Google, which is a division of Alphabet. They are way out in front. After them is GM, actually, GM Cruise. Cruise is a company that GM bought for like $1 billion, has lost about $5 billion since they bought them, and is currently worth about the same amount as General Motors. What? That doesn't make any sense. They're losing money. That's all they're doing is losing money. Cruise is Mary Barra's ticket from the left picture to the right picture. And if it turns out that whole left picture, right picture thing was all a farce and none of that was real, then she just wasted a few $1 billion, but she still has a great business in GM. If it turns out it is real, GM's going to go out of business and Cruise is going to be the new GM. That's the game she's playing. So when you read articles in the paper, and again, I'm open to people saying whatever they want. You have to be respectful to each other. If you're talking to me, you can say whatever you want. Whether you think she's a good person or a bad person in relative to closing, she's doing what she's doing for one reason. And it was the picture I showed you. She has to conserve cash so she can lose money with Cruise, so she has a chip on the table when it comes time for that transition to people not caring about General Motors because they're not going to buy a General Motors car. They're going to buy a service from, hopefully, Cruise Automation. So just a couple of ticklers on what this looks like. Europe is, I wish we had 3 hours because there's so many different avenues to all this stuff. The way different cultures approach this is very different. China, as you can imagine, is approaching it as the government saying, do this. And all the companies are like, oh, the government said do it, I gotta go do it. In Europe, it's kind of a middle ground between China and the US, where Europe is a very government-friendly location, and so they're saying, hey, we should have some restrictions, which is a lot of the pictures up here. Oslo, I love this one. Oslo said, Norway, we're not gonna have cars in our city. That's what the government, whew, wow. How'd that go? Turns out it went badly. Even in Oslo, people are like, well, I kind of like my car. So Oslo changed it and said, okay, you can have your car, you just can't park. Very effective. People still have their car. They can still drive home. They can park in their garage. But if you drive downtown Oslo, keep on driving. Because it is illegal to park in Oslo. And so Madrid, going across Europe, there's more and more of this push relative to environmental concerns, the air quality inside the city, the free flow of people and goods, and blah, blah, blah. They are wanting to get you driving a car out of their city. So what does that look like? This is kind of our vision of what this looks like. This is actually from Europe, but it would apply to Atlanta, New York, Chicago, etc. Holland, again, probably not for a little while longer, but basically you would drive to the outside of the city, park your car, and then either an autonomous car or public transportation, subway, etc. But there is nobody in that urban center who's driving their own car. That's coming. A couple of other motivators. This one's always stunning to me every time I talk about it. Every year in the US, we lose 40,000 people due to traffic fatalities. That's been true. I have a different chart I didn't include, but you could go back decades. Our deaths per mile traveled has gone down just a whisker, but in general, we kill 40,000 people a year. To a person who works in this industry, that's embarrassing. Embarrassing is not even the right word. That's ridiculous. If there was any other industry, like, yeah, that happens, 40,000 people, cost of doing business. What? And the only way you're going to get that number substantially down is to remove you. I don't know if I can say this, we suck as drivers. We're just not good at it. We think we are, we get distracted, we hit things. Oh, that's a one-timer. One-timer times 325 million people, you end up with 40,000 people who die. In order to solve that, the car has to take responsibility, because the car will become a better driver every year. There will be no more, hey, that's a 16-year-old kid, he's just learning. Nope. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the driver will just continuously get better because it's an AI-generated learning algorithm that is just going to improve indefinitely. This one gets a little bit scary for me. What does it cost to take an autonomous ride? Well, if I can use the car as often as it needs to be used, I can take people to work in the morning, I can take kids to school, I can deliver packages in the afternoon, the expectation is that you would go 100,000 miles a year instead of the national average of 12,000 miles a year. And I can probably have that car running for 10, you're gonna have million-mile cars regularly. Well, the cost per mile then of that technology, which is kind of expensive today, but it's coming down as well. This is in today's kind of environment, you're looking at 70 cents a mile. It's basically half the cost of what an Uber is today. That's not so scary, that's kind of nice. It's like, hey, cheaper ride. The scary bit is the estimates that I've seen that says, what is it worth to me, Google, I'll be playing the part of Google in this story, what's it worth to me to have you get into my car and let me have access to your data? It's about 60 cents a mile. That makes the ride free. How much do you pay to do a search for what you want to go buy or what you want to go or your travel agent? Why do you not pay anything for that? Is Google losing money because they're just giving all this stuff away for free? Big surprise, big news, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Google is printing money because they have access to your data. So when you ask a kid, hey, I'll give you a free ride wherever you want to go, but you got to let me have access to your phone, is the kid going to say yes or no? Okay. This then goes back to that very first slide that says, who's going to provide the ride? And how much is it going to cost to do it? If I have a choice between two rides, one is a Google ride that's free or a GM Cruise ride that costs me 70 cents a mile, I think I'm going to take the Google ride. So the question then becomes, who is going to be better at monetizing data from the rider inside the vehicle? Is that going to be Google, Facebook, Amazon? Or is that going to be Toyota, Ford, and VW? Uh-oh. I like these guys because I've worked with them for the last 30 years of my life, but I don't know that they have much of a chance unless you take dramatic measures to retool your business in order to make that transition. AKA Mary Barra again. So this is just a slide that kind of hints at that. So today, you've probably heard of Uber and Lyft. Those are kind of the big ones here in North America. Didi is a big one in China. Flinkster is in Germany. Drive Now and Car2Go are kind of owned by car makers but aren't very successful, which is why you've never heard of them, I'm guessing. So the question then becomes, all right, 2030, that's kind of a magic date, by the way. A lot of people refer to that of it being 10 years out. You're going to see hints of this over the course of the next 10 years. But in 2030, it's going to kind of become a, oh yeah. The iPhone analogy is overused, but I'll use it anyway. Most of you have a smartphone. And most of you, I'm guessing, if you were just having conversation with people and said, hey, how long have you had a smartphone? I've had it forever. I don't even remember not having it. You've only had it for 10 years. You just got it. But it's become such a part of your life, you're like, I don't know, forever, I think. We expect it to be very similar in automotive, that it's going to be crazy. You're going to be like, crazy guy talking about, I haven't seen one yet. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, it's going to be like, well, yeah, that's the way we've always done it. Why would you own an own car? That's expensive. There's a company, just as a side note, I think this is a fascinating technology. There was a company, real simple technology, who was dealing with folks of the elderly persuasion, but no offense, that might be some of you, who was saying, this is a huge boon, not only for kids who want a free ride to go to Starbucks, but for someone whose kids are taking away their driver's license and they're angry about that. In this case, all right, take my license, I don't care. I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. I don't need you kids. Get out of my way. So somebody developed a technology, which I love, called Flick, which is basically taking all of the complications out of it. If you know where you want to go on a regular basis, I'm going to go to the store. He had a pre-programmed button. It's a single button. He says store. You press the button, and it does all that. We'll call the car, da-da-da, and it preloads the address and does all that. So whenever you want to go to the store, store. Car shows up, takes you to the store, he waits for you, you come back out, you go home. Life has become about that level of simplicity in this environment. Ooh, what does that change? Relative to people with disabilities, I can't see, I'm deaf, I'm blind. I can't drive, but I can get into a car. So who actually delivers the ride? I've already kind of hinted at some of this, but this is unanswered. Waymo owns the technology. They're going to win as far as delivering the autonomous ride. But as far as who owns the delivery of that service, is the city of Boston going to have a Boston car? Maybe. They could. And then they would just subcontract out the hardware to Google to be able to, and there'll be some company that makes the car. And then you would have points of interest of Boston in the car that you get into and say, oh, I'm kind of thinking about going out tonight. Where could I go? And the car would be set up to facilitate Boston. Could you have Home Depot have a car? Could you have ESPN have a car? Yeah. Because it's not your car anymore. That's the thing you have to get your head around. It's like, well, I wouldn't want that in my garage for 10 years. Well, yeah, no duh. You only need it for 3 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it is. So you only pay for it when you need that particular service. So what does that look like? This is kind of a vision. I love the fact that you see the little airplane banner in the back that says Yanfeng. We're gonna be there flying banners when this day comes. But this is starting to create kind of a pictorial of what I showed you graphically before of outside the city, you've got a park and ride, and there's just gonna be a lot more green space, and there's gonna be a lot less roads. Because I don't need them as much anymore. Well, that's pretty compelling. So that was all what's going on in the world, in the industry, autonomous ride share, bringing you somewhere for you instead of you buying the car. That's coming. So this is now a transition to, well, what does that mean? I guess selfishly, I'm going to talk to you now about what matters to me. What does that mean for the inside of the car? Yanfeng, being part of JCI Print, so we care about what happens on the inside of the car. What's nice about that is that we believe, pretty strongly, that you all will care about what happens inside the car. Because if you think about the car that you buy today, I have no idea what you guys are driving, but you probably care what it looks like. You get it washed because you park it in your driveway, and the neighbors walk by and they go, oh, there's Susie's BMW. That's such a nice looking BMW. That's Susie. She's a great gal. Or, boy, that's a Prius. Boy, that Johnny really loves the environment. Look, he bought a Prius. That's what he thinks. It says something to the world about who we want to be, or what we want to say to the world. If you don't own a car and you just have a car that picks you up, do you care what it looks like on the outside? We don't think so. Well, from a business standpoint, that's a huge challenge for headlight manufacturers, wheel manufacturers, really, really expensive rims on your car. I don't know if you guys are buying really expensive rims, but what happens to that market? You don't care what the wheels look like. I just want to have a good experience once I step into the car. So there's just a couple images of what could be coming. I love this one. That is the IKEA car. IKEA is saying, hey, this is what I want. Oh, yeah, okay, we'll see. It's a beautiful time in the industry. There's a reasonable chance you'll actually see one of these on the road at some point, and it might succeed, it might fail. But we're getting out of the paradigm that says, well, yeah, 4 passengers, seating forward, steering wheel, engine, wheels. Even if you go electric, it's a car. Well, in this world, the car is no longer that thing. It's a completely different thing. Could it be this? I don't think it will be, but it could be this. Could it be this? This was a sketch from a art student that we hired as an intern. Just starting to break the paradigms of what you would expect the inside of a car to look like. Same thing here. Could that be a car that picks you up and takes you to the store? Sure. No reason why it couldn't. What I find particularly fascinating is if you look at this one and you look at this one, they're really, some similarities, but mostly very different images. I could ask a trivia question to see if anybody notices the one design element that is carried over from this to the plant. What's going on with kids that you can't have an interior if you don't have a plant? Oh, I never would have thought of putting a tree in my interior. but they think it's fundamental. Well, of course you're going to have a tree. Again, breaking down the stereotypes of, well, no, we know what the inside of a car looks like. It's looked basically the same for 100 years. We've tweaked it, but not much. It used to be a metal instrument panel. Now it's a plastic instrument panel. This is a complete rethink. So now getting back to local here in Holland, Yanfeng, these are show cars that we've done over the years to kind of demonstrate our view of what 10 years from now looks like. We've kind of gone to a pretty formal process. This gets a little corporate, sorry for that. But basically 4 years ago we did ID15, and then 2 years ago 17, and now this year we had XIM20, which I'll be hitting in a little more detail. You can tell even for us, 4 years ago and 2 years ago, there's still cars, there's still seats, still facing forward, a couple of tricks and things. This year we said, no, if we're really talking about what's going to happen 10 years from now, we got to show something that's not, and this is important from a business standpoint, we aren't going to show what we want the future to be, because that doesn't help it. Essentially, you're lying to yourself and saying, well, it'd be nice if the future looked like that, because then we'd still have good business. What you need to do is tell yourself what you think the future actually will be, and then adjust your business to match that, rather than hoping the reality matches your business. Again, left picture, right picture. If you hope that right picture never comes, you're fine until it does, and then you're out of business. So you need to be very honest about what you think is going to happen and how that affects your business. A couple of slides on the research that was done that played into this. There's 10 words. There's probably $250,000 worth of research that went into those 10 words and the data that backs up those 10 words. So you can look at it glibly and be like, oh yeah, simple perfect service, of course. But those words mean a lot based on, we did research on 3 continents, 6,000 people, and came up with 28 factors of quality of life, and really got down to what do people view as a successful interaction with the products and services around them. So 10 simple words ended up being the distillation of all that work, but it led to a significant change in the way we think about things. There's another big change in terms of, this is kind of what we have today, primarily ownership. 95%, 99% of you people own your own car, but you have the ability to call an Uber or call a Lyft or Zipcar or things like that. But the car itself is the same. There is no Uber car. An Uber car is somebody's car that they bought so that they could park it in their garage and said, oh, by the way, I'll also give some people a ride. But if you change those words to time, it has a pretty significant impact on what you think that interior of the car needs to be. If I'm going to own it for years, well then, again, it has to say something about who I am. If I'm just going to have it for minutes, the things I care about are completely different. Convenience, ease of service, connectivity, connection. Next one, I already started to hit on this. The car you own is an object. When I grew up watching Magnum PI, I knew that if I could ever afford a flipping Ferrari, man, I would get one because Magnum PI was so amazing. That isn't what kids dream about anymore. Maybe because they don't have Magnum PI to dream about it. They're dreaming about the memory of the trip with my friends, or the thing that I did, or the pictures that I posted on my social media. I could care less if I own it. I only want to be able to share my life experience. Whoa, that's a huge difference in how I'm going to consume mobility again. If I don't care about owning it, oh. A couple of other concepts here. We always look for analogies in how we interact with other parts of our life. I don't know if you can catch left to right on the top and left to right on the bottom. When we go to a restaurant and we talk to the hostess, stewardess, and she says, how many in your party? And then she says, would you like to sit outside or would you like to sit in a booth? When I go home, I come home, hard day at work, honey, man, hard day at work. I have a choice. I can either go out on the front porch and watch the world go by, or I can cozy up next to the fireplace. We choose enclosure or exposure in most of our interactions with society. In a car, I only have one choice. I own the car, I get into it, I drive, I get out. But if I'm calling a car, I could choose which of these two I would actually want. So you put all that together, summary slide. We'll just skip through that. Put that all together, it turns into this sketch in the upper left-hand corner, which was done by a designer here in Holland. Mitt is his name. That then turned into more sketches, actually physically building a prototype, and then kind of a final sketch. Team here in Holland who actually built this vehicle. You can see the different aspects. Chris Pearson working on the instrument panel. And I'll show you a video here in just a second to actually go through kind of what this turned into. But here's kind of the final sketch by Amit. Kind of a rendering of what that looks like in a plan view. We built this in Holland about a year ago, a little less, 9 months ago, 10 months ago, and had an unveiling. And we did the unveiling in California because if you're going to do an unveiling in February, don't do it in Holland. When we were there was a reporter who came and did this summary, so this would be better than me talking to you. Maybe. The sound check worked before we started today. All right. All right. I'm going to do the voiceover. So there's a reporter in California who basically, there's some words over here as well, which is just going to reiterate what I just talked about, although it's moving much slower as well. Which we're not on the internet, so I'm not sure why this is playing so slowly off of the... All right, so we're going to do still frames. That's not an interesting still frame. All right, it's paused. So he talks about at CES, all the automakers are talking about the same stuff, whether you're OEM automakers or you're tier ones like us, and nobody has a freaking clue of what the future is going to be. We're all trying to figure that out. We're all guessing. And so you've got a company here that has the window glass completely glazed over with, it's basically a screen. So it's like looking at a TV until the steering wheel comes out, then it goes to clear and I can drive, and then I put the steering wheel away and the car is driving itself, and so now I can have displays all the way around me. Well, is that cool? Maybe. That's why they're going to try it. We're not in that business, so we're not going to try it. There was another company, and I'll let you decide if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but it's a fun part of the video, where they thought it'd be kind of fun to get exercise while I'm in the car. So if I'm not driving, I got free time, and so they basically had these kind of rowing machines. And you have these people getting interviewed, and they're sweating. And do you think this is a good idea? I'm not so sure. Pretty good chance it's not going to be that. And then there's just a bunch of other iterations, which the reporter referenced, basically because he said ours was so much better than theirs. Yep, there's the becomes transparent at CES. There's the exercise. The gentleman on the visual right is the one who was sweating quite heavily. You think so? We're going to go with no on that. All right. I'd like to hit just a couple of images here if I could find it. Otherwise, if not, I'll just speak to it on the prototype that I showed on a slide earlier. So here's an interesting one. This is a horrible idea in a car that you're going to buy. So what this is a fabric-covered kind of headliner pillar trim. It has an LED matrix behind it. Technology doesn't matter. There's a stereoscopic camera that knows kind of where your hands are and where your body is. And so you can basically gesture with your hands, and that kind of lit portion next to Tim's left ear travels with your hand. and you can just make patterns with your hand. What is the purpose of that? Zero. There's no reason to have that other than, this is where I get to work with fascinating people who I would have said, well, that's dumb. Why would I ever do that? Until you build it and you put a bunch of executives in there who have been telling you for the last 6 months, I don't know why we're doing this. Okay, it's time to go. We got other stuff we got to do. People have never had the opportunity to be whimsical in their car. Because who wants to buy whimsical? If I'm going to own that car for 10 years, that's going to be cool for like a month and then be the dumbest thing ever. But if I never buy the car, is it fun? Absolutely. Could you do that for a year and then once people kind of get tired of it, do something else? Yes. Just because you're refurbishing a fleet of vehicles, not having to go to each one of your garages and have to refurbish things. So that's one I wanted to show. It's actually, won't be able to show it in action, but on here the little white rectangle is where you'd put your cell phone. The table is smart. It knows you have a cell phone there. It's wirelessly charging without having to put a cable on it. And the platform descends an inch to say, yeah, I got your phone. We're good. The little circle in front of it that you can just see a half a circle is where you put your coffee mug, and it realizes there's a coffee mug there, and it descends 2 inches that says, I got it. I got a coffee mug. In the middle, where you see the slight illumination in the middle of the table there, that is the entire HMI, the human-machine interface of the entire vehicle. Well, do I want to change the temperature? I've already told it where I wanted to go. I got my phone when I called the vehicle, so it already knows all that. I can control the audio. I can control the smell. It's kind of interesting because if I'm in a shared vehicle, it'd be nice to have a different smell than the last person who got out of the car. And then there's also a slide in terms of cleanliness. Again, if I'm not sure who the last person was, there's a UVC sanitizer. If you work in the hospital business, hospital rooms get blasted by UVC light in order to kill all the bacteria and viruses. We would have the same thing here. In between riders, you would sweep everything that the person touched to make sure that there's no transmission of anything you don't want to be transmitted. So that's our view of what the future looks like as far as the inside of the car. It's certainly not going to be up to us. We're a tier 1 supplier. We work with customers. And it's a guessing game as to who should we be working with? Should we be working with GM, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, Nissan, Toyota? I keep listing them. Or should we be working with Apple, Facebook, Google, etc.? Or should we be working with the city of Boston? Should we be working with the guys that are doing the autonomous shuttle downtown Grand Rapids, the little AMO thing? We don't know. So we work with anybody who will let us. Which leads to some really interesting conversations, because then you get to talk to executives at all those companies and say, well, so what are you thinking? And I absolutely can't tell you what they're thinking, but I can tell you that what I'm talking about is going to happen. There are people investing billions and billions of dollars to make this happen. The thought that this goes away is a fiction. The only thing we can argue about is when. And we can argue about what it looks like in its exact manifestation and who wins and who loses. Does GM go out of business or not? That's not a given necessarily. But the fact that we are going to be downtown Chicago, when you go down there to catch a play, you won't drive your car to the play. God, right? It's about freaking time. It's a horrible experience. So, last 2 slides of the presentation. This now gets out of my area of expertise, but it's just fascinating, and maybe more fascinating than the last however many minutes I've been talking to you. What does this mean for ... It changes a ton of stuff. So I just listed, this is top of mind for me. This isn't some deep, thoughtful research. How do we plan our cities? How do we transmit power? Today, it's all about gas stations getting into your car. In the future, it's going to be an electric car, and that electric car is going to be staged somewhere by a mobility service provider. Well, do you have your own power plant right there? Because I've got to charge thousands of cars overnight. Well, yeah, you probably build a gas-fired power plant right there on site and use that to just charge all those vehicles. Gas stations, all right, they're not going to be gas stations anymore. Will they be electricity stations? Maybe, but Why would I want a gas station if I'm a mobility service provider? I would let the car drive for 300 miles and then go back to my gas station, electric charging station, and then go back out and do another 300 miles, and then gas stations they're gone. Drivers who drive for employment, there's a truck driver there, as you can imagine. That's already happening. We were talking this morning that some people thought they saw it in Michigan. Could be. MDOT is very active in this space, but for sure it's happening in the southwest U.S. Arizona, New Mexico, California. There are trucks that are driving themselves. Now there's a safety driver there behind the wheel, making sure that nothing bad happens, but the technology is not a problem on a freeway going through the desert to drive itself. Traffic monitoring, there's not going to be any traffic to monitor because it's just going to be cars driving themselves. They don't need a stoplight. They don't need to know whether it's red or green. They're talking to each other. Parking monitoring, you're not going to have parking. Traffic judges, there's no accidents. There's nothing traffic. Car dealers, nobody's selling cars. Ooh. If you've got friends who are in the car dealership business, enjoy the last 20 years. Car manufacturing, this is the poke at GM, Ford, Toyota. The main value that GM, Ford, Toyota bring, frankly, is brand. They're pretty good at building cars, but what they're really good at doing is making you want their car. If all they're doing is building a car, somebody else can make a car just about as well for half the money, because they don't have all that legacy costs of labor and pension and this and that and big, huge plans. And it's just going to be a battery on wheels. Is Toyota the best manufacturer of battery on wheels? Probably not. Car interior manufacturing. Hopefully there's a place for us. Auto mechanics. You're not going to have a mom and pop auto mechanic because all of the mechanics are going to work at a central mechanics place where they maintain the fleet rather than maintaining each of your individual cars. Data analytics, this is a good news story if you've got kids and they're wondering what they should do for a living. That is a massive industry and it will become 100 times more massive over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years. If you're wondering what to do for a living and hoping you don't get laid off, that will not stop growing for a long, long time. Last page, just keeps going. Car insurance, you don't buy insurance. A company buys insurance. Are they going to call Progressive and say, hey, Progressive, I need 300,000 policies? No. They're going to self-insure. Tesla already does that because they've got enough vehicles. They made their own insurance company because they can make a better deal than Progressive can. Progressive goes away. Garage repurposing. If you have a garage but you don't have a car, if you want to start a business, that might be an interesting business to say, hey, give me a check and I will repurpose your garage into a man cave. Rental cars, this is already getting disruptive, even with the person driving the shared mobility ride. Hertz, Avis, et cetera, those guys are all in deep trouble. The fleet maintenance, again, I don't have Joe the mechanic, but I do have somebody who has to maintain these vehicles. End-of-life recycling, it's really hard to recycle each of your individual cars. But if one company has, whatever, 1 million cars, well, it's already centralized. It's pretty easy now to actually recycle all of those bits and keep it all from going into the landfill. This is a poke at my friends at Gentex, current automotive suppliers of unnecessary components. If your main business is the rear view mirror, now what's nice is the people at Gentex are fabulous and intelligent, and they are going to be around 50 years from now because they're working on all kinds of stuff that will get them to the right side of the picture. But the reality is their current business, all the electrochroma, that's gone. That capital is going to run until it's no longer needed and they're going to throw it away. And the last one I had on there was car financing. There's no bank loans. No one's going to go get a car loan. It's just going to be a company that's going to go buy en masse an investment of fleet of vehicles. So with this being my last slide, I just to bring it all back home. And I think this is the most important point because this is what I run into most often of, you're saying that this is going to happen, right? Yeah, this is going to happen. So should I tell my kids they don't need to get a driver's license? There's this weird, anytime you have disruptive change, I mentioned it earlier, but it bears repeating. It's going to look like this is never going to happen until the day that it has already happened, and you'll be surprised. And then the day after that, you'll say it's always been that way. So as you look out at the world, as you look at Holland, and you take trips, and you say, boy, it just doesn't seem like that's happening or not. If you keep your eyes open, you will see stories that pop up where it's like, oh, that is happening. Florida passed a law a month ago making it legal to drive a vehicle without a safety driver. The next time you go to Florida, it's possible you'll be driving down the road and you'll look over and you will see a car with nobody in it. That's legal right now. Effective, not about to be, right now, that is legal in Florida. I don't think anybody's doing it yet, but there are plans to do it. So it's a fascinating time to be in the business. It's a little bit scary for people who are outside the business of, oh boy, business models are going to change dramatically. But it's kind of an exciting time to not know what the future is, but to know that we all collectively have a voice into speaking into what we want society to look like that's different 10 years from now, 20 years from now versus what it's been. With that, thank you everybody. Appreciate your time.
Are these on? Yes. Questions?
You talk and think fast so I can sneak in a threefer. I have a friend who lives in the country and the lanes aren't marked on the sides. He's thinking the cars have to see that to drive. That's part A. Part B, no safety belts and any of those things. Maybe you don't need them. And then part C, what about the guy that works out of his truck? Wants his stuff in his truck to work on houses.
So A, no, B, yes, C, that is a problem. The lanes. When you drive your car today, your car, when it's got lane departure, it is looking for the physical lane. It's looking for paint on the road. That car is screwed if you get to a road that has no lanes. The technology that Waymo is using is not looking at lanes. It's looking at geospatial positioning. It's looking at cameras of what's around me. It sees the curbs. It can center itself. It's doing everything except looking at the lanes. Because you have to be, frankly, independent of troublemakers who think, oh, this is an autonomous car, I'm going to have some fun with it and get rid of the lane and it gets in an accident. They have to be independent of that. And frankly, if I could spend 30 more seconds on that one, it's fascinating the things that you all can do really badly that the car can do really well, but there's also a reverse. If you drove up to a picture on the road that somebody painted of, I don't know, whatever, a dog, you'd be like, oh, that's dumb, somebody painted a dog on the road. The car sees a dog in the road. How does it know fake dog from real dog? It's just instantaneous. Your brain is smart enough to process that. The car, that's a hard problem. So that's where the technology goes. It'll be independent of all kinds of infrastructure. It'll be infrastructure independent. You could go out in the desert and it would be able to know where it is and be able to avoid things. Number two, which escapes me for the moment, seatbelts. Seatbelts will absolutely go away. Airbags, all that stuff. But that will be a secondary outcome because first you have to show that you don't need them anymore, then they'll go away. And so you'll have autonomous vehicles with interiors where you can move around a lot, but there'll still be a seatbelt there. And there'll still be a law that says you have to wear it until people get angry enough to say, this is dumb. Nobody's dying anymore. Why do we have these stupid things? And then it'll go away. Truck, business, yes, there will still be, and thank you for bringing that out. This isn't a cars will completely go away. There will still be people that need to do some things with their truck. We could try and create the list of what that is, whether it's if I'm running my own lawn care business, well, how do I do that with autonomous? There will be situations where people will still own their vehicle. They will get smaller and smaller, and ultimately, it's very similar to horses today. Are horses outlawed today? Well, no, it's a hobby. You have a farm and you get a couple horses and it's kind of cool, but you wouldn't have that be your primary mode of transportation, of course. Cars will be very similar. There'll be people who have a car out by the racetrack because they still like to drive, or someone who needs it to do something, but you won't have 100 million car sales every year to people. You'll have 1 million car sales to people globally. That's a global number. And so when you take out 99% of the volume, most of the automakers won't be there anymore, and you'll just have people selling niche products. But that will still be available for someone who needs to do something.
Okay, I have grandchildren in Florida, and if I get in an autonomous car that goes 300 miles, where does it recharge? Do I have to change cars? Can I stay in it for the full 17 hours it might take me to get there?
That day will come, but that's not where it's going to start. So certainly all of the stuff I've talked about, again, is going to start in city centers. In the top 20 cities in the U.S., you will have a situation where you can do autonomous rideshare. When does it become, and this is maybe a variant of your question, if I'm going to go down to Chicago, today I either drive myself and then I got to find parking, pain in the neck, or I take the train and it's got a bunch of stops, that's kind of a pain in the neck. When can I take an autonomous car from, I live in Grand Rapids, sorry about that as well, and take that directly downtown Chicago? Well, that's going to take a bit because that's going to require some infrastructure. But once you get the city centers established and you have the technology established and you have societal acceptance, which frankly is a pretty big one that people say, yeah, I can get into that. That's why they're doing it in Grand Rapids, right? They're not making money, they're not testing out technology, they're not learning anything. The only reason they're doing the autonomous shuttle in Grand Rapids is so that people will get into it and go, well that was okay. That's the whole point. They call it an autonomous petting zoo. That the little goat's not so scary once you pet them, and it's just a goat. So society needs to be exposed to be like, I thought it was kind of creepy, but once I rode in it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Once that all gets established, then your question becomes absolutely, it's an easy half step. And what will most likely happen, if you were going to go from here to Florida, you would just have a trip planned out for you that you would say, hey, Google, I want to go from here to Florida. And they'd say, okay, we're going to take you to Fort Wayne, and then we're going to have to switch cars because that one has to charge, and we'll get you in another car, and then we'll take you to and it would be 4 cars that take you down to Florida. But you need to have the network established to do that. You're not going to have the network until you have the individual dense pockets of cities first. So 2030 to 2040 is where the real trigger happens.
Jeff,
Yeah.
right behind you is the CSX main line from Grand Rapids to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously rails, there's no steering involved, this type of thing. Where does that line sit in 2035?
Trains are an interesting mix, frankly. Most people ask about airplanes, and airplanes are far more potentially disruptive. If you fly from San Francisco down to LA, I got to drive to the airport, wait in line, go through security, but it's a 4 or 5 hour trip anyway. If I could just get into a car and take a nap and sleep all the way down there, screw the plane, I'm going to take a car. Trains are a unique deal in that you can haul immense amounts of stuff very affordably and very efficiently. It's all in one big lump and off it goes. I don't think cargo train activity is affected that terribly much, although it does become a lot cheaper to ship stuff by semi-truck all of a sudden. If you think of the math, to drive a truck down the freeway, to haul whatever it is you're hauling, half the cost is the person and half the cost is everything else. The gas, the tolls, the whatever. And so if I take the driver out, I just cut the cost to ship by truck in half. So that will chew into train capability. But if I've got to take 1 million pounds of stuff from Holland to California, it's still going to be cheaper to take it by rail.
Yes, I have no trouble. I have no trouble believing that autonomous is more efficient and that efficiency is driving this change. What I don't quite understand is why we have been stuck for so long in the destructive inefficiency of gas combustion.
I'm not a huge conspiracy guy, and in my mind this plays into that. At the end of the day, business is primarily about inertia. And I have all of this invested capital in the internal combustion engine, and I've got all of the society expecting that to be normal. And even now where you've got Elon Musk saying, no, there's a better way. I can sell an electric car, and he's right. But he's still having a hard time, right? It's not like, oh, yeah, let's sell electric, that's easy. That's a massive societal shift, and that's coming. So in this time frame, 2030, 2040, everybody's walking away from the internal combustion engine as the primary means of powering it. Even with the entire industry's desire to get there, it's still going to take 20 years. And so the thought that, it's a decision by an executive at GM to kill the electric car, the EV1, boy, if they wanted to, they would have converted society to electric. I personally don't believe that. That the amount of effort it would take to convert society off of fuel onto electric is a massive undertaking that requires government and industry and society, and it has to be more than a few people who want it. It has to be the entire ecosystem that we live in that has to make that happen. You're welcome to disagree with that and say, no, oh, boy, if they hadn't killed the EV1, we'd all be driving electric cars right now, but that's not my experience.
I know there's a lot of questions out there, and unfortunately, our time is drawing to a close. I think I've seen you, and you had one more question, and that will be the last, but don't be discouraged. Jeff has promised to stay, and if you have a question, you may go up and ask him personally, because this has been an absolutely fascinating topic, and one that all of us need to be aware of and understand what is happening, the unintended consequences of what will happen as a result of it, and also the exciting, wonderful things that will happen with it. So, last question.
Thank you. Can you say something about the environmental impact?
Yeah, I would say it's an extension of the last question of there's a growing, in the European examples, the Europeans aren't outlawing cars because of safety, specifically. They like the idea of being safer. But the primary driver is the environmental pollution density is pretty significant. If you think about a power plant, I can put that outside the city somewhere typically. Well, Holland, we like to celebrate it right downtown. But I can kind of move it away from the people. The cars, they're with the people. If you've ever been to Beijing in the summertime, you can't see the sun. And you're like, boy, it's another cloudy day. It's not cloudy. It is a perfectly sunny day, and you literally can't see the sun. We talk about environmental stuff. It's like we have no clue what environmental bad behavior is. But you take that and you say, okay, in order to solve that, you've got to get the individual contributors of carbon dioxide, monoxide, and this is independent of global warming, set that conversation aside, just PM 2.5, just the stuff that you can see and smell and feel and blah, 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 that all comes from little contributions of each individual car. And we've gotten better and better with each individual car, but you're never going to get to the point where that urban area with 25 million people all right on top of each other has breathable air until you get the cars to be electric, and to have a lot less of them, frankly. I did not put my phone on mute. I can't talk right now. So yes, in the last half of that conversation, real quick, VW, you probably read about in the news, but the VW Dieselgate, where they lied on the emissions and said their diesels were clean when in reality they weren't clean, that wasn't just VW. That's a little bit of a dirty secret in the industry. The Daimler's diesel was just as bad, but they had to keep up with VW, so they said, yeah, our diesel is pretty good too. And everybody who made diesels fudged. And so you have this massive backlash saying, well, you guys are a bunch of freaking liars and you're destroying the environment. The response to that is, all right, we're going electric. VW, Daimler, BMW, they argue about it from time to time, but they are all committed, all in that they are going electric. And as a society, that's where we're going to be in that 2030 to 2040. You're just going to see this ever-increasing penetration of electric into all of the transportation.
Jeff, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Greatly appreciated.